Welcome to another deep dive here at the Operating Room Global. We're going to be taking a look at a pretty crucial topic.
Yeah.
And really fascinating, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fatigue in the operating room.
It's a big one.
We're all about making surgery safer worldwide.
Exactly.
And this topic really gets at the heart of that.
Yeah, for sure.
By the way, if you're enjoying these deep dives, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes.
Yeah, please do.
So we've been looking at a bunch of research on how fatigue can actually affect how surgeons perform, and even more importantly, how it affects patient safety.
Absolutely. There's a ton of research out there that shows just how big of a deal this is.
So I guess the big question here is, how tired is too tired?
Yeah.
You know, when you've got a scalpel in your hand.
Right.
And what does that mean for the patient?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And it's not a simple answer.
Right.
You know, it's not just about whether the surgeon got enough sleep the night before. We're talking about this kind of buildup of fatigue from these really long shifts, you know, and irregular schedules.
Oh, yeah.
And just the mental and emotional intensity of doing surgery. It all adds up.
Yeah, you know, I was thinking about, it's almost like that feeling you get after pulling an all-nighter, you know?
Right.
But instead of just like cramming for a test, you're performing this life-saving procedure.
Exactly. The stakes are a little bit higher.
Yeah, no pressure, right?
No pressure at all. And the thing is, fatigue doesn't just make you feel drowsy, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Research is showing that it actually impairs these, like, cognitive functions that are super important for surgeons.
Okay, so give me an example.
We'll take working memory, for example. That's your ability to hold a bunch of information in your mind at the same time.
Okay, yeah.
And that declines, like, really sharply with fatigue.
Oh, wow.
And you can imagine that can be like a disaster when you're trying to keep track of all these anatomical details, you know, or remember critical steps in a procedure.
So it's not just forgetting where you put your keys.
Yeah.
It's like potentially missing something really important during surgery.
Yeah, exactly. Because your brain is just overloaded.
Wow, that is scary.
Yeah. And then you've got attention span, right? How long you can focus before your mind starts to wander.
Right.
And studies have shown that even like mild fatigue can reduce a surgeon's ability to concentrate.
And so what does that mean?
Well, it means they're more prone to distractions.
Oh.
And yeah, more prone to making errors.
So it's like a snowball effect, I guess.
Kind of, yeah. And it gets even more interesting when you realize that fatigue doesn't just affect the mind.
What do you mean?
Well, it affects physical dexterity, too.
Really?
Think about it, all those fine motor skills that surgeons need for things like suturing, you know, or manipulating these tiny instruments.
Yeah.
Even a slight tremor or just a delayed reaction time can have huge consequences during surgery.
Wow, I'm starting to see why this is such a big deal.
Yeah, and the thing is, those tremors, those delayed reactions, they can all be caused by fatigue.
It's like trying to thread a needle after being awake for 24 hours, right?
Exactly. Not exactly a recipe for precision.
No kidding.
And there's another layer to this whole problem.
Okay, tell me more.
It's not just the individual surgeon that's affected. Fatigue messes with communication and teamwork in the OR too.
Oh, right, because you've got a whole team in there.
Exactly.
Oh.
So you might have a fatigued surgeon who's not giving clear instructions.
Okay.
Or a tired nurse who's hesitant to speak up if they notice something's wrong.
Oh, gosh, so everyone's kind of off their game.
Yeah, it can create this really dangerous situation. You know, it reminds me of that study where they simulated fatigue in pilots and air traffic controllers.
What happened?
Well, it wasn't pretty. They saw these communication breakdowns, people missing cues, misunderstandings.
Wow.
And the researcher said it was basically a recipe for disaster in that kind of high-stakes environment.
Which is basically what the OR is, right?
Exactly.
So we've got impaired thinking, shaky hands, and communication breakdowns, all because of fatigue. This can't be good for patient outcomes.
You're telling me. And the data backs it up. There are a ton of studies that show a clear link between surgeon fatigue and an increased risk of medical errors.
Like that study in JAMA a few years back, the one about performance declining after being on call overnight.
That's the one. It was a real wake-up call for a lot of people.
Yeah, I remember reading about that.
It showed that surgeons who worked these extended shifts were just more likely to make mistakes, which then led to longer operating times,
Oh, wow.
more blood loss, and even a higher risk of complications.
And those complications can have a ripple effect, right?
Absolutely. Longer hospital stays, readmissions, even increased mortality rates.
It's kind of terrifying when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. And it's important to remember that these aren't just statistics, you know?
Right.
Behind every one of those numbers is a real person, a patient whose life has been affected by a medical error that could have been prevented.
That's a really good point.
So yeah, it's serious stuff.
So knowing all of this, what can we do about it? Is it just a matter of surgeons toughing it out and pushing through fatigue? Or are there actual solutions?
Well, thankfully, there are solutions. And it's not just about coffee breaks.
Good, because I was about to ask if we're all just relying on caffeine to keep surgeons alert.
No, caffeine's definitely not the answer. We need some systemic changes, starting with work hour reforms.
So you're saying no more 36-hour shifts?
Ideally, no. We need to move away from those grueling schedules and start implementing limits on how long shifts can be,
Okay,
and making sure surgeons get adequate rest periods.
that makes sense.
We need more balanced schedules that prioritize surgeon well-being.
But how do you balance that with the need to provide timely care to patients? I mean, surgeries can't exactly be put on hold because a surgeon needs a nap.
That's true. It's a valid concern. But it's about finding a sustainable model that benefits both patients and providers.
Okay, I see.
It might mean rethinking how we schedule surgeries, how we staff operating rooms, and how we use technology to support surgical teams.
So it's more strategic planning and resource allocation.
Exactly. And it also means changing our mindset.
No.
You know, moving away from the idea that longer hours automatically equal better care.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In reality, a fatigued surgeon is more likely to make mistakes, which can lead to complications and a longer recovery for the patient.
So ultimately, it's counterproductive.
Exactly.
Okay, so shorter shifts, mandatory rest periods, smarter scheduling.
Right.
What about those wellness initiatives you mentioned earlier? What we talked about specifically?
Well, think about things like mindfulness training, yoga classes, access to healthy food options, maybe even on-site massage therapy.
Wow, okay.
It's about giving surgeons and nurses the resources they need to manage stress, improve their sleep, and just maintain their overall well-being.
So it's not just about preventing burnout. It's about actively promoting well-being.
Exactly. And creating a culture where taking care of yourself is seen as a good thing, not a sign of weakness.
I like that.
And we can't forget about technology.
True, there's got to be a role for technology in all of this.
Absolutely. There are some amazing advancements happening that can help mitigate the risks of fatigue in the OR.
Like what?
Well, you mentioned AI systems that can monitor fatigue levels.
Yeah, how do those work?
Yeah.
Do surgeons have to wear special sensors or something?
It can be as simple as using cameras that are already in the OR to analyze facial expressions
Yeah.
and other subtle cues that indicate fatigue.
That's incredible.
There are also wearable devices that can track things like heart rate variability and sleep patterns.
So they can get a really good picture of the surgeon's fatigue levels.
Exactly. And these systems can even be programmed to alert the surgeon when they need to take a break,
Wow,
or suggest handing over a procedure to a colleague if their fatigue levels are too high.
that's amazing.
Uh,
It's like having a built-in safety net to prevent those fatigue-related errors.
Right. And there are other technological advancements too.
Like what?
Well, there's a lot of work being done on AI-assisted surgery planning tools.
Okay, what do those do?
They can analyze medical images, patient data, even surgical videos to create these personalized 3D models of the surgical field.
So surgeons can basically practice the procedure beforehand.
Exactly. And that can really reduce the mental strain during the actual surgery.
Wow, that's incredible.
And these systems can also provide guidance during the surgery,
What kind of guidance?
alerting the surgeon to potential complications or suggesting different approaches. It's like having a virtual assistant right there in the operating room.
This is all so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But let's be real, implementing these changes especially, the technology must be super expensive.
Yeah, it's a valid concern.
Are we talking about a future where only the elite hospitals can afford to address surgeon fatigue?
Well, it's important to acknowledge the financial barriers,
Right.
but as technology keeps advancing, costs usually come down.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the cost of not addressing fatigue,
No.
all the medical errors, the complications, the longer hospital stays, that's far greater in the long run.
That's a really good point. It's an investment in patient safety and ultimately better healthcare for everyone.
Exactly. And it's not just about hospitals and technology either.
What else is there?
We need to empower patients to be informed advocates for their own safety.
So what can patients do? What questions should they be asking their surgical team to make sure they're in the best possible hands?
That's a great question, and one that we'll dive into more deeply after a quick break.
Sounds good. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. It's kind of crazy. You know how we've come to accept this culture of exhaustion in medicine?
Yeah.
It's like this weird badge of honor to push through fatigue work, these crazy hours, like it's something to be proud of.
Right. Like it's a test or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I think it's time we challenge that mindset.
I completely agree. We celebrate, firefighters and EMTs who work tirelessly to save lives.
Yeah.
but we don't often talk about what those long hours, the stress, those situations, the toll it takes on them.
That's so true. It's like we expect them to be superhuman. Like they're immune to fatigue.
Yeah, and we know they're not.
Of course not. Surgeons are incredibly skilled, dedicated professionals.
Absolutely.
But they're still human. They need rest. They need support. They need a work environment that prioritizes their well-being.
100%.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the problem, how fatigue impacts both surgeons and patients.
Right.
But what can we actually do about it?
Yeah.
What are the solutions? What can hospitals and surgical teams do to create this safer, more fatigue-aware culture?
Well, we've touched on a few things already.
Yeah.
Work hour reforms, wellness initiatives, team-based approaches.
Right.
But let's dive a little deeper into some of the specifics.
Okay, let's start with work hour reforms. I know there's been a lot of debate about this in the medical community.
Definitely.
What are some of the most effective ways to limit shift durations, and make sure that surgeons are getting enough rest?
One approach is to set stricter limits on how many hours in a row a surgeon can work.
Okay.
Similar to what they've done for residents. There's some good evidence that capping shifts at 12 or 16 hours with mandatory rest periods in between can make a big difference in reducing those fatigue-related errors.
But wouldn't that mean you need more surgeons to cover the same workload?
Potentially.
And wouldn't that be more expensive for hospitals?
It's a legitimate concern, but there are ways to get around those challenges.
Like what?
Well, some hospitals have come up with these really innovative scheduling models
Okay.
where they use a mix of full-time and part-time surgeons.
Interesting.
That way they can make sure there's enough coverage without overworking any single person.
So it's about being creative and finding solutions that work for everyone.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing both patient care and surgeon well-being.
Right. And we need to move away from that old school mentality that longer hours always mean better care.
Totally. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
A tired surgeon is more likely to make mistakes, which can lead to complications and a longer recovery time for the patient.
So it's kind of a lose-lose situation.
It can be, yeah.
Okay, so shorter shifts, mandatory rest, smarter scheduling.
Got it. What about those wellness initiatives?
Yeah.
What kinds of programs are we talking about?
Well, things like mindfulness training, yoga classes, access to healthy food,
Oh,
maybe even some on-site massage therapy.
wow. Sounds pretty good.
It's about giving surgeons and nurses the resources they need to manage stress, get better sleep, take care of themselves.
So it's not just about preventing burnout. It's about actively promoting well-being.
Right. And creating a culture where self-care is seen as a positive thing.
I'm really interested in the technology piece of all this.
Yeah.
You mentioned AI systems that can track fatigue levels.
Right.
How does that work?
Yeah.
Do they make surgeons wear like special sensors?
It can be a lot simpler than that, actually.
Okay.
You can use cameras that are already in the OR
Really?
to analyze facial expressions and other cues that show fatigue.
That's wild.
There are also wearables that track things like heart rate variability and sleep patterns.
So you get a really in-depth picture of the surgeon's fatigue level. Exactly. And some of these systems can even be set up to alert the surgeon if they need a break.
Wow.
Or suggest they hand off a procedure to someone else if their fatigue levels are too high.
It's like a safety net.
Yeah, exactly.
What about other technology? What else is out there?
Well, there are some really cool AI-assisted surgery planning tools in development.
Okay, what are those?
They use medical images, patient data, even surgical videos to create these personalized 3D models of the surgical field.
So the surgeon can basically see the whole thing laid out before them.
Exactly. It's like a dress rehearsal for the real thing.
That's amazing.
And it can really take some of the mental strain off during the actual surgery.
This all sounds so futuristic, but I can't help but think about the cost of all this.
Yeah.
Implementing these changes, especially the tech, must be really expensive.
It's true. There are financial barriers.
So are we talking about a future where only the fanciest hospitals can afford to address surgeon fatigue?
It's a valid concern, but as technology improves, costs usually come down.
That's true.
And if you think about it, the cost of not addressing fatigue, all those medical errors, the complications, the extra time patients spend in the hospital, that adds up to way more in the long run.
That's a really good point. It's an investment in patient safety
Exactly.
and better health care for everyone.
And it's not all on hospitals and technology either.
Right.
We need to give patients the tools to advocate for their own safety.
So what can patients do? What should they be asking their surgeon to make sure they're getting the best possible care?
That's a great question, and one we're going to explore right now. We've talked about all the science behind fatigue and the risks and even some solutions. But what does all this mean for you, the patient getting ready for surgery?
Right, like what can I actually do with this information?
Well, it means you have the right to ask questions, and honestly, I think it's your responsibility.
Okay, but isn't it kind of awkward to like grill your surgeon about how much sleep they got the night before a big operation?
Yeah.
I think that would just add to the stress.
I get what you mean, but think about it this way. You wouldn't get in a car with someone who told you they'd been up for 24 hours straight, would you?
Probably not.
And surgery is a lot more complicated than driving.
Yeah, good point.
So asking your surgical team about their well-being isn't rude. It's being a smart patient.
Okay, you convinced me, but what should I ask? What are the magic questions?
It doesn't have to be a whole interrogation. Just a few simple, respectful questions can give you a lot of information.
Like what?
You could say something like, how many hours have you been working today? Or, when was the last time you took a real break?
Okay, those are good.
Hmm.
But what if I don't like the answers? What if the surgeon seems evasive or gets offended?
Always trust your gut. If something feels off, don't be afraid to talk to someone else on the team, maybe the anesthesiologist or a nurse.
Okay.
You're part of the team, too. Your voice matters.
It reminds me of that whole speak up for safety movement.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
all about empowering everyone in the hospital, patients included, to speak up if something seems wrong.
Right, because sometimes you're the only one who sees something that's out of place.
Exactly. You know your body better than anyone else.
So asking questions and speaking up are key. Is there anything else patients can do to get ready for surgery, knowing what we know about fatigue?
I think the biggest thing is to be informed.
Okay.
Read about your procedure. Learn about the risks. Know what to expect during recovery.
That way I can ask better questions.
Exactly. You'll be more aware of potential complications, too.
So knowledge is power.
Absolutely. And remember, even if it's inconvenient, sometimes delaying a surgery is the best option if you're not comfortable with the situation.
That's a good point.
Mhm.
I'd rather wait and have a well-rested surgeon than rush into something and risk complications.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the bigger issue of changing the culture in medicine. You know, we need to stop glorifying overwork and exhaustion.
Yeah, it's like a weird rite of passage for doctors and nurses to push themselves to the limit like that.
Right. But as we've seen, that kind of thinking can be really dangerous.
It all comes down to recognizing that rest and well-being are crucial for good patient care.
I love that. It's not about being lazy or pampered. It's about taking care of yourself so you can be at your best for your patients.
Well said. So a well-rested surgeon is a safer surgeon,
Absolutely.
and that benefits everyone.
For sure.
So the big takeaway here is don't be afraid to ask questions, trust your instincts, and advocate for your own safety.
Right. You're not just a patient. You're an active participant in your healthcare.
That's a great way to put it. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. We've explored the science behind fatigue, the risks, and even some really exciting solutions.
Yeah, it's been a great discussion.
And I hope our listeners feel empowered to be more informed and engaged patients.
Me too. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into such an important topic.
Absolutely. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay safe.